Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about grades, what I think about grades currently, and what I see in the future for grades. It's still a work in progress, so if you have any feedback, I greatly appreciate it. A group of teachers and I are still working on a few things. But 3 years ago when I first started teaching, the first semester, I realized very quickly that grades don't tell an entire story. They tell a specific moment in time what a student did, right? And let's say a student did very poorly at the onset. They dug a very early grave for themselves, and it was hard to recover. Now, I felt that grades kind of showed more about failure than progress. And I was on a search to help find how to show students progress. Now, the first stop was assessment for learning. And I thought this was awesome. AFL wasn't the perfect solution, maybe, maybe not. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. But it allowed for students to have multiple opportunities to demonstrate what they know. So retakes. They can retake any test. And I allowed students for the past 2 years to retake any test they want at any point in time they want within the semester. So for semester 1, you can retake any test that you want. Yes, there's some loops that you have to go through, like meeting with myself for at least one appointment. You have to make sure that all the homework was completed, and to do assessment corrections and whatnot. But they were allowed to retake any assessment. And the nice thing about assessment for learning was that their grade was composed only of assessments. So of their sum of the assessments. No homework to inflate their grade, no extra credit for bringing in boxes of tissue. Yes, I was that kid in elementary school. You were too at some point in time. But I didn't want grades to reflect extra things. I just wanted them to reflect what students knew. And this was all great, except I came back and I reflected, I thought, well, if a kid got an 87 on Unit 3 test, what did they not know? And I struggled with that for a long time, for the better part of the past 2 years, up until now. For the past year or so, I've been talking to a few colleagues, kind of planting seeds about standards-based grading. Now, I'm focusing on creating a climate in the classroom that de-emphasizes grades. So no points, no percentages. It's all about learning. Go figure. But there's a few things that you have to kind of build leading up to that. First is targets. We'll also have to talk about assessment and also focusing on how to translate a mastery grade to a traditional ABCF. Yes, I intentionally left D's out, and you'll find out why. But in our district, we have to report a grade, like a traditional grade. And myself and some colleagues have been thinking about this and trying to figure out a way, what's a good way to do this for the better part of this past school year. Now, as far as targets go, we have this thing called Common Core. I don't know, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. But we got this thing. It's Common Core. It's kind of like the law, right? We kind of got to follow it. But it's hard to identify what exactly they're trying to say. If you haven't read through the Common Core yet, there's a lot of things that are packed into each standard. So kind of dissecting those, we come up with things like power targets and skill targets. Now, power targets, in our case, they're more general, overarching things. Like, I can solve an equation. That's very general, right? That could be a power target, whereas skill targets right under that, maybe you have something like, I can solve a multi-step linear equation. And under that, you have something like, I can solve a quadratic equation by factoring, or I can solve a quadratic equation by using the quadratic formula. All of those are skills, but ultimately, I want my students to be able to solve an equation. Right? All right, cool. Now, magic number of targets is kind of open-ended, if you will. After discussing with a number of colleagues and my director, I think we came up with the magic number between, say, 12 and 16 targets per semester. By targets, I mean power. For skills, it could be a lot of skills. It depends on what you're talking about, what you're teaching, and what you want students to do. So for solving equations, you could have 27 skills that you want to cover. But that's really overwhelming if you give that list of things to students. It's a laundry list. If I give a kid a list of power targets and there's 16 and I say, hey, you got to do this by the end of the semester, reasonable. Instead of giving 184 skill targets saying, all right, you got to do this by the end of the semester, that's kind of overwhelming for myself. But how do I assess? Well, this is actually my first year going into, my 5 minutes are up. Jeez, I'm going over, guys, sorry. There's too much to talk about. This is my first year doing, thanks. Sorry I didn't make a video. This is my first year doing SPG, but I've piloted last summer and this summer. I've been using things for assessment. I've been calling them Show What You Know, SWYK. Now, I want students to show me what they know. Each of these Show What You Knows have anywhere between 1 and 3 power targets, and they have anywhere between 1 and 3 questions per target. So they range in length from, say, 3 to 9 questions per assessment. Now that could take 10 minutes of class time, or it could take 42 minutes of class time. It all depends on what you're covering and the levels of questions that you're also asking, which is also something that's pretty important because, yes, I want all students to be able to solve an equation, but let's take it up a notch. Let's go to level 2. If I give you a question that looks a little bit different but still encompasses the same skills, you haven't seen this type of question before, can you apply it now? Maybe that's a level 2 question. And a level 3 type of question might be, okay, justify, explain, use your words. You know those mathematical practices in Common Core, right? Let's use those. Be able to explain and create even. I love create questions. If you can create, if the students can create a question for me, I think that says a lot about what they can or can't do as well. Now, when it comes to grading, I'm looking for consistency and progress. Okay? Now, I give approximately 3 Show What You Knows per unit. Now, the first Show What You Know is going to be really basic. It's going to be all straight skills. Can you do this? Everybody should be able to do this. The second Show What You Know, that's where I start to implement and ask level 2 type questions. Can you apply this to a different context? Level 3s are maybe more open-ended type questions, and they're going to be more conceptual, maybe creation type problems as well. Now, as far as calculating a grade, my colleagues and I have come up with a rubric. Website is out there if you need, and you can look at the PowerPoint later on as well. We use a rubric MATH, go figure, right? M is for master, A is for approaching mastery, T is for teacher, help me. I still have a few questions. T is kind of a little gray area. I envision it as a student needs some scaffolding. They need you to sit down and kind of sit down with them and guide them through a problem. They don't fully have a good grasp of the concept, but they kind of know a few things. Whereas H, that actually means help me because I either left the question blank, or I have no idea how to start, or I tried to make up something, but I just drew a picture instead of the assessment. So from here, each Show What You Know, students will give themselves an MAT or H.
Good morning, E-Town. Here are today's announcements.
Great. I'm going to talk over it. All right, so each of the assessments has a power target, and students give themselves a rating on the power target of an MAT or H. I go over, give them feedback. I give them an MAT or H. Now you might ask yourself, are they giving themselves an appropriate grade?
At 6:30 p.m.
In the beginning, maybe not, but they learn. They're honest with themselves because truly, if you de-emphasize grades and de-emphasize points, they just want to learn this stuff. So, by maybe 3 to 4 weeks in, your mastery level rating that you give them is going to be about the same as what they give themselves, which is kind of cool.
Copies are available.
Now, how do we go from this
location
to
the loft,
ABCF?
third floor, the Evanston Public Library.
Well,
the Fleetwood
if we're looking at a total of 16 targets, you can see this. I'll kind of talk over it, but you can look at it online as well. To get an A in the course, a traditional A, you have to master at least 80% of the power targets.
Of How Long Will I Cry? Saturday, August 9th.
No crying! 80% of the power targets. Now, the caveat for the A, you cannot have any H's or T's.
Violence interpreter.
If you have
a cure for violence.
an H,
Saturday, August 9th.
that's kind of a red flag,
4:30
like
p.m.
you don't know something. We want students to have A's to be able to say that they know this stuff, they know this stuff really well. To get it a B, we're also looking at an 80% mark, but 80% of the power targets are at least approaching mastery. You can't have any H's in this case. T's, maybe 1 or 2 is okay. Again, it's all going to be based off of what they know. Whereas a C, 70% of the power targets have to be at least approaching mastery. Now, if they don't show evidence of any of that, they're not going to pass. We're leaving D out in this case because truly, what's the difference between an F and a D? Summer school, right? For the kids that got D's in my class in the past, I knew they didn't know enough. They just got by. They're not going to succeed in the next class. We want to make sure that they do succeed, so we want to give them an opportunity too. So by raising that bar, we're trying to figure out who's going to rise to the occasion. And you'll be surprised that a lot of students do. Now, challenges with SPG buy-in, obviously, you've got your own personal buy-in. Maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking, there's no way that this will work with me. I don't know about that guy standing up there, but this would not work in my school, this would not work in my classroom. I challenge you, start thinking about it. I want to plant the seed with all of you. Just let it sit. And with 2 or 3 minutes after I'm done, you guys can kind of talk about it. And you're going to kind of think about why this makes sense. It makes sense to students too. I teach summer school right now. I'm teaching a readiness course for Algebra 2. These are kids who teachers have identified as those who might be in danger next year. They've never experienced SPG. They've also never experienced flipped classrooms. I did both. This summer, it took 2 days for them to buy in. 2 days. Nobody has asked, what's my grade? How many points did I get for this? At all since day 2. Also, parents have to buy in. Now, yes, it's going to be difficult for some parents to accept that their child is getting an A and that's not the best grade that they can get. But if you focus on the learning, and if you're focusing on being able to communicate and identify what the student actually knows and what they need to work on, it helps all 3 parties involved in that student's learning, student, parent, and teacher. We're all able to identify exactly what the student needs to work on, exactly what they need to do to improve, and we can all have an open discussion on strategies that we can all use to work with each other. Now, I kind of just have a little ditty. I think that standards-based grading makes teachers reflect on their curriculum. It ensures that each lesson, activity, and assessment has purpose. I think that's best practice, right? Like, we want to make sure everything has meaning. I truly think that SPG does that for us because we're creating things that serve purpose. I have a few resources for you guys, a couple of books, one by Marzano, and then some people on Twitter to follow. I'm going to plug Sachin. I love Twitter. I've been talking to people across the country, across the globe. I talk to some people in Australia about SPG every once in a while. There's a professor at the University of Kentucky who's been looking over our rubric every once in a while, giving us feedback as well. And then also, as you mentioned earlier, Twitter chats. SPG chat and SBL chat, standards-based grading, standards-based learning chats. They kind of are one and the same. They both occur on Wednesdays at 8. And then COL, Culture of Learning chat. That was just this past Monday, every Monday at 8 p.m. That's it.